Okay, let's get into the story of Hudson, Wisconsin. It's a place really defined by its geography, the rivers, the railroads, and this constant dynamic of growth.
Absolutely. And we're looking at it through this really interesting collection of materials you've pulled together. We've got old historical notes, recent city reports, planning documents, environmental studies.
Right, quite a mix. Historical accounts, reports on housing and finance, studies on the St. Croix River's health, even an education study from the local schools, plus those big comprehensive plans looking ahead.
Yeah, exactly. So our mission here is to sift through all this, pull out the key facts and insights, and kind of piece together a picture of Hudson for you.
We want to understand its past, its environment, the challenges it's facing now, especially around growth, and how it's trying to plan for the future. This is about getting to the core of the place, straight from the sources.
So let's start way back, 1848, the very beginning, right there along the Willow River.
That's when the first land purchases happened, on both sides of the river, actually. You had Louis Massey and Peter Boucher south of the Willow.
And Eliezer Steves took land on the north side. So right away, you have this sort of division baked in geographically.
And that quickly led to two separate little settlements, almost on top of each other. Buena Vista was platted first, 1849, south of the river.
Then Willow River, the settlement, was laid out in 1850, just across what's now Walnut Street. Two distinct communities born basically at the same time.
And that initial split, it wasn't just temporary. It created a division that kind of lingered.
Right. It wasn't until 1852 that the state legislature stepped in and said, okay, you two need to merge, become one town called Hudson.
But just giving them the same name didn't smooth everything over. The early economy was all about lumber and farming.
And there was this mill, the Willow River Mill, built in 1850 on the north bank. The documents suggest this mill was actually a real source of friction.
Yeah, the folks south of the river apparently felt it should have been built on their side. It sounds like a classic early settlement dispute.
And it wasn't just talk. When Hudson officially incorporated in 1857, they drew the northern town line right at the Willow River.
So North Hudson was left to develop separately, different influences shaping it.
And a huge influence was the railroad. It arrived in 1871, but critically, the end of the line, the terminus, was in North Hudson.
Ah, that's a big deal. So North Hudson's development was tied directly to the railroad from the start.
Exactly. Daniel Baldwin, who was involved with the railroad, platted North Hudson in 1873. And the layout shows it smaller lots, denser housing, a simple grid. It was built for the railroad workers.
And the repair shops were there too, right? Near Lake Malalo, built in 72.
Yes, those first shops burned down. They were rebuilt in 1891, a bit north of the original spot. And those shop yards are actually nominated now as a historic district, which tells you how important they were.
Okay, so while North Hudson is developing around the railroad jobs, Hudson proper, south of the river, is kind of going down a different path starting in the 1850s.
Right. Hudson becomes the center. It's designated the county seat for St. Croix County. And it booms as this industrial and commercial hub.
So it's attracting a wider mix of people than just railroad workers. You've got laborers, sure, but also speculators, business executives.
Drawn by the lumber, the farms, and the potential the railroad represented, even if the tracks ended next door.
It's interesting you mentioned the West Wisconsin Railroad actually put their management offices in Hudson, even though the line terminated in North Hudson.
Yeah, that really shows Hudson's emerging status as the administrative and commercial core, doesn't it?
And you see that reflected in the neighborhoods developing in Hudson, too. Much bigger, lots longer blocks compared to North Hudson's grid.
And even the street names tell that story. East-west streets often got tree names thinking about the lumber industry. North-south streets were numbered, increasing as you moved west from the river.
The sources even point out where the aristocracy tended to build 3rd and Vine Streets, the east side of 6th Street.
And those areas are also up for historic district nomination. So you can literally see the map of that social structure from back then.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There was a massive fire in 1866, leveled the commercial district.
A huge setback. But the city council responded really quickly that same year. They passed an ordinance creating a fire district.
This was west of 3rd Street.
Right. And it mandated using less flammable materials for any new buildings in that zone. Stone, brick.
So that fire, devastating as it was, directly led to the kind of architecture you see in the downtown core today. The 2nd Street Commercial Historic District is basically a product of that rebuilding effort.
It really is. Shows how disasters can reshape a place physically. Then, moving into the 20th century, Hudson's identity starts to shift again.
The sources mention a decline in that earlier industrial and commercial base.
Yeah, and at the same time, you get the rise of the automobile. Plus, Hudson is pretty close to the Twin Cities job market.
So it starts transitioning into more of a bedroom community, as the documents put it, people living in Hudson but working in the metro area.
That fundamentally changes the town's economic engine and its character. Architecturally, though, you see a reflection of all these periods. Lots of residential building in the 19th and 20th centuries.
Often using local wood, adapting broader styles. The sources list a bunch of examples, right? Greek Revival, Gothic, Italianate.
Yeah, the Frederick Darling House, Boyd T. Williams House, William Dwelly House, also Colonial Revival, Tudor styles, the neoclassical look for public buildings like the library, and later craftsman bungalows, too.
And that T.E. Williams block stands out, mentioned as the first fireproof building after the big fire. Stone and cast iron.
And there's clearly a local commitment to preserving this history. Surveys were done in the 70s and 80s,
Yeah.
identifying hundreds of historic sites. People are actively involved, fixing up properties using tax credits.
Before we shift gears, there was one specific person mentioned, Dr. Boyd T. Williams.
Right, a Hudson native. Became quite a prominent doctor, focused on cancer treatment. He actually set up a sanatorium in the old Charles Lewis House, which is now part of a historic district itself.
And his medical library, including his own research, ended up at the Mayo Clinic. That's a pretty significant local contribution to medicine.
Definitely. So, okay, that gives us a solid historical base.
Right.
Let's talk about the environment now, especially the waterways. They're so central to the town of Hudson.
Right. The town of Hudson itself, distinct from the city. It's within St. Croix County, bordering the city, and North Hudson to the west.
And water is everywhere. The St. Croix River forms part of its western edge. The Willow River runs right through it, connecting Little Falls Lake and Lake Malibu.
Little Falls Lake is mostly in Willow River State Park, right? Which is right on the town's northern border.
Yeah, and that park is a huge asset. Camping, hiking, lake access. It's a major recreational draw. The town also has the Clapp Waterfowl Production Area, which is protected wetland.
And the planning documents make it clear residents really value these green spaces. The surveys show they love the privacy and the natural setting.
Absolutely. Now, the St. Croix River itself has this special designation, Outstanding Resource Water, or ORW. Both Minnesota and Wisconsin classify it this way.
What does that mean practically?
It means it's recognized for exceptionally high quality, so there are stricter rules about discharging anything into it. Wisconsin's rules aim to maintain natural background conditions. Minnesota requires proving there are no other feasible options before allowing new discharges.
And there's also a focus on phosphorus, right? Trying to prevent algae blooms.
Exactly. The regional planning team has a policy aiming for no net increase in phosphorus loading into the river. A USGS study from 2000 done during low water flow gives us a snapshot of the river's health back then.
What did it find? Generally good quality.
Generally good, yes. Low sediment, low turbidity. But it did note changes as you go downriver. Things shift chemically and biologically, especially below the dam at St. Croix Falls.
So maybe more impact downstream.
It seems that way. The aquatic life in the upper parts showed minimal disturbance, but downstream of the Sunrise River, there were signs of both physical and chemical changes.
Did it pinpoint specific things?
Yes.
Like nutrients?
Yeah, it mentioned increases in chloride and sulfate downstream of one site, and higher levels of total nitrogen and phosphorus in the lower sections, probably from stuff getting stirred up from the river bottom.
Okay, so how does the town of Hudson factor this environmental context into its planning?
Well, the comprehensive plan has policies focused on protecting these features. Waterways, wetlands, deep slopes, wildlife habitat, mainly through enforcing existing ordinances.
And encouraging new development to be sensitive to the landscape.
Right. Designing projects to minimize disruption is a key theme. There's also an emphasis on educating the public about reducing runoff and pollution.
Like suggesting native plants for landscaping.
Exactly. And exploring different ways to handle winter road maintenance, like using salt brine instead of just rock salt to lessen the impact on water quality. Practical stuff.
Okay, so shifting from the natural world to the human one. What's the vibe in the town of Hudson today based on these documents? What do residents value?
The comprehensive plan really emphasizes the town's distinct character. Rural, open, large lots, not much traffic. That's what people seem to prize.
And the resident surveys really back that up.
Overwhelmingly.
Yeah.
People want to preserve that rural feel and keep urban sprawl, especially from the Twin Cities, at bay. That came through loud and clear.
Are there specific concerns tied to that, like future growth?
Definitely. Concerns about population, increase training services, emergency services, roads. And remember, most properties are on private wells and septic systems, so utility capacity is a factor.
And worries about being annexed by the neighbors, particularly the city of Hudson.
Yes, that fear of annexation is explicitly mentioned. They want to maintain their independence and character.
The survey even got into what businesses people wanted, didn't it? A grocery store seemed popular.
Hy-Vee or Trader Joe's got mentioned a lot. But interestingly, many people specifically said no to big strip malls. They don't want that kind of development.
Yeah, I saw some unique requests too. A dispensary, bakery, specific restaurants, a dog-friendly brewery.
Right. It paints a picture of wanting certain local amenities, but within a framework that keeps that small-town rural character intact. The underlying theme is definitely anxiety about development changing the community too quickly.
The plan also touches on community facilities and services, like the library partnership.
Yeah, goals around maintaining the town hall, collaborating on recreation programs, including for seniors and youth, creating gathering spaces, and boosting volunteerism.
And given how close they are to bigger places, working with neighboring towns in the city seems essential.
It's crucial. The plan has policies about maintaining agreements, trying to avoid boundary fights, planning services efficiently across borders, and coordinating with the school district and the city of Hudson on things like annexation and joint projects. They know they're interconnected.
Which leads us nicely into housing. That housing affordability report had some pretty stark numbers.
It did. It came out of that state law requiring reports from bigger municipalities. Hudson got theirs out in 2023 using 2022 data. And the key benchmark is that HUD guideline housing costs ideally under 30% of income.
And in Hudson?
Well, the 2018-2022 estimates showed almost half of renters, 46.7%, were paying 30% or more.
Wow, nearly half. And homeowners.
Over a quarter, with mortgages 26.2%, were also hitting that 30% or more mark. And crucially, those percentages are higher than both the county and state averages, so affordability is a real pressure point.
There is also that interesting point about the housing fees collected on new construction permits, a huge jump in the average fee per unit between 2022 and 2023.
Right, from about $600 in 2022 to over $2,400 in 2023.
What drove that big increase?
It was mainly the type of housing approved. In 2022, they permitted 175 multifamily units, which tend to have lower fees per unit. In 2023, they approved 0 multifamily units, so those fees were concentrated on fewer, likely single-family homes.
And property values themselves are climbing fast. The median was around $325,000 in the ACS data, but Zillow had it over $450,000 by early 2023.
Yeah, a jump of over $125,000 in median value in about a year. That's intense pressure.
So how does the town's comprehensive plan try to address this? What are the goals for housing and growth?
The plan talks about promoting a balanced housing supply, different types, affordable options, senior housing, workforce housing. It encourages development that fits with what's already there.
Does it mention density?
It does, accommodating increased density, but only in appropriate areas. They also want to identify spots for infill development and maybe ease regulations for mixed-use projects.
And the plan sets out different land use categories, right? Residential, ag-residential.
Yes, commercial, industrial too.
Yeah.
And for those residential and ag-residential areas, the preference is clearly for larger lots, like 1 to 2 acres minimum, and ideally using conservation developments.
Explain conservation developments again. How do they differ from a standard subdivision?
So instead of carving up all the land into individual house lots in a grid, you cluster the houses closer together on smaller lots.
Ah, okay. And that leaves larger chunks of the land undeveloped.
Exactly. Preserves open space, natural features, or farmland. It's a tool to allow some development while trying to hang on to that rural character residents want.
The plan also targets land near the interstate, I-94, specifically for commercial development.
Right, to try and expand the tax base. There are policies about where that should go and what it should look like.
Design is a theme throughout, isn't it, for both residential and commercial? How buildings look, how they relate to the street?
Yeah, things like having front doors face the street, using windows effectively, encouraging porches, managing setbacks, trying to ensure new stuff fits in and doesn't create negative impacts. They even include visual examples, like for outdoor lighting.
And there's a push for infill development building on vacant lots within already developed areas.
Yes, because that uses existing roads and infrastructure. They want to discourage leapfrog development way out on the edge, which can be expensive to service. And things like property maintenance codes are also mentioned as ways to keep neighborhoods looking good.
Okay, let's talk about getting around mobility. What's the transportation situation like in the town?
The plan maps out the road network. You've got minor arterials like US 12 and County UU, major collectors like County A. Pretty standard stuff.
What about other connections beyond local roads?
Well, there's the proximity to MSP Airport, which is significant. Local trucking terminals, carriers like FedEx and UPS, and the Union Pacific Freight Railroad runs through.
And for commuting to the Twin Cities, which sounds like a big factor.
There's a carpooling lot mentioned near I-94 and Carmichael Road, and bus lines and park and ride options are available for commuters.
So what are the town's main goals for transportation in the plan?
Mostly focused on maintaining the existing roads and working with the county and state to make sure the network is safe and efficient for travel within, to, and through the town.
Any specific policies mentioned, like for future tech?
Well, coordinating on road improvements is key.
Hmm.
And they do mention considering things like adding electric vehicle charging stations. The idea of green streets also pops up.
What are green streets?
It's about designing streets to help manage stormwater runoff better, using things like plants, permeable pavement, that sort of thing, integrating environmental thinking into road design.
Going back to that resident survey, transportation was definitely on people's minds, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. Concerns about traffic congestion came up a lot. Specific spots like Carmichael Road, County A, The Hill were mentioned. Also, safety issues at certain intersections like Kinney Road and Badlands Road.
And people felt they needed more options, especially for certain groups.
Right. More transportation options, particularly for older residents, and a real sense that there aren't enough safe or pleasant places to bike or walk outside of maybe the state park. That feedback shows where the current system isn't quite meeting everyone's needs.
Okay, one last major piece from the sources. This interesting study from the Hudson Public School District.
Yes, this was different. A research study done right in their elementary schools, grades 2 to 5, across 6 buildings.
And it was looking at the connection between certain teaching strategies and student reading growth.
Exactly. Specifically, it examined how often teachers used formative assessment strategies and how that related to student progress on the NWEA MAP reading tests. Those are common standardized tests measuring academic growth.
So what exactly is formative assessment in this context? How is it different from, say, a final exam?
Good question. The study defines it as assessment that happens during the learning process. The whole point is to get information while students are learning, so the teacher can adjust their teaching right then and there to meet student needs.
So it's not just about grading at the end. It's about feedback during learning to help kids improve.
Precisely. Helping students see where they are, where they need to get to, and what steps to take. It's assessment for learning, not just of learning.
And what did the study find? Did using these strategies more often make a difference?
It really did. The key finding was pretty striking. Classrooms where teachers reported using these formative assessment strategies frequently, like 1 to 3 times a day, versus just a few times a week or less, those classrooms showed significantly better end-of-year reading results.
How significant?
The effect size was calculated as a plus 16% growth. It's a noticeable positive impact on student reading achievement.
Wow. Did the study identify which specific strategies were most effective?
Yes. It highlighted 3 that were used significantly more often by the teachers whose students had higher growth.
What were they?
1 was giving students chances to look at examples of strong work and weak work to understand the difference. 2 was making sure students could actually talk about what they were learning and what they needed to do next.
Okay, making it active for the student.
Right. And the 3rd was providing students with feedback that was descriptive, telling them what to improve and how, and also interactive, maybe involving some back and forth, not just a grade or good job.
So specific, actionable feedback. Were other strategies mentioned too?
Yeah, teachers reported using lots of things: turn and talk, think, pair, share, whiteboards for quick checks, asking questions orally, taking notes on student progress, reading journals, peer feedback, individual conferences, using running records to track reading fluency. A whole toolbox.
It's interesting because so much focus is often on standardized tests for accountability, like under No Child Left Behind back in the day.
Exactly. But this study really provides strong local evidence for how powerful these in-class, ongoing assessment techniques can be. The study even noted that the impact of strong formative assessment is sometimes compared to the gains seen from one-on-one tutoring.
That's quite a comparison.
It really highlights the importance of teachers constantly checking for understanding and adjusting their instruction based on what they see, being evaluators of their own impact moment by moment.
So wrapping this all up, we've covered a lot of ground on Hudson. from its very beginnings with that split along the Willow River.
Through its history shaped by lumber, railroads, and becoming a county seat, then that shift towards being more connected to the Twin Cities.
We looked at the crucial role of the environment, the St. Croix River, the value residents place on open space.
Dug into the current challenges around housing costs and managing growth, based on their own reports and plans.
Touched on transportation networks and resident concerns, and even got insights into effective teaching practices happening in their schools.
And all these details, all these perspectives came directly from that rich set of source materials you gathered.
It really paints a picture of a community with a strong sense of identity, deeply tied to its landscape, but also facing very real modern pressures, especially from the growing metro area next door.
Absolutely. It's a complex balancing act.
Which makes you wonder, how does a place like the town of Hudson, where residents clearly value that rural character so highly, actually strike that balance? How do they accommodate some growth and development needed for the tax base without sacrificing the very thing that makes people want to live there? What does that compromise look like day to day on the ground?
That's the core tension, isn't it? Woven all through those plans and surveys. A really interesting question to ponder.
Well, thank you for joining us on this exploration of Hudson, Wisconsin. We hope you found it insightful.